Monkey D. Dragon vs Figarland Garling happened in God Valley and is about to happen again. On one side, the world's most wanted criminal and leader of the Revolutionary Army. On the other, the former leader of the Holy Knights, now elevated to the position of Gorosei, the highest authority just below Imu. Two characters who share a past in God Valley and who seem destined to meet again in Marijoa. In chapter 1159 of the One Piece manga, we discover that Dragon was present at the God Valley incident when he was only 17 years old. He was the one who saved the baby Shanks by hiding him inside a treasure chest. But that act of courage did not repeat with Shamrock, who ended up being recovered, possibly because of the direct interference of Garling. It is plausible to imagine then that the two first clashed there, and that Dragon, still without enough experience and power, only managed to survive. And what could have guaranteed his survival? The answer may lie in the treasure chests of the God Valley tournament. 9 devil fruits were among the prizes of the competition. We already know that 2 of them were Kaido's Azure Dragon Fruit and Bartholomew's Pawpaw Fruit, but there is still the chance that one of those fruits was precisely the one that today belongs to Monkey D. Dragon. That would explain how he managed to escape certain death, and at the same time, save Shanks, who, by the irony of fate, ended up being kept inside that same chest. Decades later, Destiny seems to be preparing the rematch. Dragon is at the peak of his strength, commanding the army that fights against the world government and inspires revolutions across all seas. Garling, on the other hand, ascended to the title of Gorosei, becoming more influential than he ever was. And it may be that this confrontation is already happening right now, as Marijoa burns. It is about Dragon's past and especially about his future that we are going to talk about in today's video, including his possible death. The past of Dragon in God Valley. The incident of God Valley, as we know, was one of the greatest clashes ever recorded in the world of One Piece. The event brought together the greatest pirates of that era, such as Rox D. Zebek, Roger, and Whitebeard, and among those involved was a young Monkey D. Dragon, only 17 years old, still serving as a Marine. This shows how Dragon went through an event very similar to what Luffy experienced during the War of Marineford. Both, at 17 years of age, had to survive in the middle of the greatest conflict of their times. During the incident organized by the world government, a red-haired woman begged the young dragon to protect her 2 children and not allow them to be taken by their father. The names of those children were Shanks and Shamrock. As we know, baby Shanks was found inside a treasure chest that had been looted by Roger's pirates during that incident. This suggests that Dragon was able to save at least one of the babies from that massacre. To protect him, he hid him inside a treasure chest, ensuring his survival amidst that chaos. This action shows that even as a young man, Dragon already demonstrated his disgust toward the cruelty of the nobles and his instinct to protect the innocent. There is even a brief scene showing the future Fleet Admiral Aokiji, also 17 years old at the time, troubled by the fact that Dragon had gone to that island. Apparently, the young dragon was supposed to have remained on the marine ship, but his thirst for justice seemed to speak louder. Later, I still need to make a video to talk more about the story between those two. At the same time, baby Shamrock seems to have been left behind. Dragon tried to save both children, but he only managed to guarantee the life of Shanks. The most likely scenario is that Shamrock was retrieved by his father, Figarland Garling, who was directly involved in those events. That would explain why only Shanks was rescued by Dragon, while Shamrock disappeared from history and may have remained under the control and influence of the Figarland family. Another point that remains open is the possibility that Dragon obtained his devil fruit in that very incident. The God Valley tournament offered 9 fruits as prizes, and some of them ended up in the hands of well-known characters: Kaido's Azure Dragon Fruit, Kuma's Pawpaw Fruit, and probably some of Big Mom's children, like the twins Katakuri, Daifuku, and Oven. That leaves 4 unidentified fruits, which opens the possibility that one of them was claimed by Dragon. Perhaps this fruit was the decisive factor that allowed Dragon to survive in the midst of a battle of titans and under the hunt of Figarland Garling. We know that Garling was a scoundrel, but he showed the desire to take his children to the Holy Land, probably to continue his lineage as a holy knight. This means Garling would go to the last consequences to save those children, even for a 100% selfish reason. This also means that Dragon, the moment he was spotted carrying those 2 babies, would have become Garling's primary target in that tournament. In other words, a Marine who wasn't even part of the Celestial Dragon's hunt would feel firsthand what it means to be chased like an animal. Dragon, who would later become known as someone deeply empathetic toward the oppressed, would himself have been oppressed for trying to save the lives of 2 innocent babies. Moreover, Dragon, being just a Marine and probably without any real power, would have been hunted down by the leader of the Holy Knights of that era. It is almost as if we were to see Luffy being chased and attacked by someone like Dracula Mihawk during Marineford. The difference in power level is simply terrifying, and remembering that Garling as a holy knight may have already made a pact with Imu, and even back then, possessed the supernatural powers he wields today. But perhaps something allowed Dragon to escape, stealing a treasure chest that contained one of the 9 devil fruits, hiding baby Shanks inside that chest, and inevitably eating that fruit himself, even without knowing what kind of power it would grant him. In this way, even without fully understanding how to use his new powers, Dragon might have been able to confront Garling in some way, or at least increase his chances of fleeing. If he had the air Logia, he could simply vanish like the wind, or if he had some mythical Zoan, perhaps he could have taken to the skies. It is ironic to think that one of the fruits given as a prize in the Celestial Dragons tournament may have been the very spark that ignited the flame of revolution in Dragon's heart. We do not know for certain how much this event changed and traumatized Dragon's life, but as I have been saying, it is very likely that this incident pushed him to abandon the Marines and begin his life as a revolutionary. Just as Luffy set sail on his life as a pirate at the age of 17, Dragon may have done the same at that time, beginning his life as a rebel at 17 as well. However, it would be even more compelling if this event truly traumatized Dragon's life. We know how Marineford was a turning point in Luffy's life, and how deeply it scarred him, and it would be fascinating if God Valley had inflicted that same psychological wound upon the young Dragon. Beyond witnessing cruelty, beyond measure, he himself would have been hunted by Garling, just like the slaves in the tournament, and felt firsthand how powerless he truly was in the midst of that sea of giants. And if he truly wanted to change the world, he would need to become far stronger than he was at that moment. A perfect parallel with Luffy's story. But after all, what could Monkey D. Dragon's devil fruit actually be? I've always found myself reflecting on this, and I've always believed that the only truly overpowered devil fruit in God Valley was Kaido's Azure Dragon Fruit. I think it would be overkill if there were a whole bunch of overpowered devil fruits, or even more than one mythical zone, among the prizes at God Valley. But I'm becoming more and more convinced that this is exactly the case, and that Dragon really did acquire his fruit at God Valley. I already made a video here on the channel last week, revisiting the 3 main possibilities for Dragon's fruit. So the only thing I can say is that maybe the hint to the answer lies precisely in the eyes of the young Dragon. Notice how Dragon's eyes, and even his hair, resemble Luffy's when he uses his Gear 4th Snakeman form. I believe many people have noticed this, but perhaps that similarity is actually Oda's hint that Dragon's devil fruit is related to a serpent. After all, Snakeman is Luffy's form that resembles a snake, but not just any snake. And to know more, those who haven't seen it will need to go watch that other video, alright? The rematch, Dragon vs Garling in Marijoa. In chapter 1149 of the One Piece manga, we discovered that Marijoa was in flames and under attack. Because of this, Shamrock, who was in Elbaf, was summoned back to deal with the situation. We don't know who is attacking the Holy Land, but it is speculated to be the Revolutionary Army. A few chapters earlier, it was mentioned that the revolutionaries were sabotaging the supply lines destined for the Celestial Dragons in Marijoa, so it could be that they launched a direct assault. We've already seen them invade the Holy Land once before during the Reverie, but this time it may be that Dragon himself is present. The last time we saw him, he appeared reacting to Vegapunk's transmission, accompanied by a deafening silence. But on that occasion, Dragon declared that they needed to move as quickly as possible. With the world on the verge of sinking into the ocean, people across the globe would soon begin fighting for survival, and the revolutionaries had to step in to contain the chaos and overthrow the government as soon as possible to prevent that from happening. So considering the time gap between the end of the Egghead arc and the present events in Elbaf, it is possible that Dragon has already moved his army to Marijoa, and that the final conflict for the throne of the world is happening right at this very moment. For a long time, I kept asking myself, who would be Dragon's main opponent in this final saga? The first possibility that always comes to my mind is that Monkey D. Dragon would face the former Fleet Admiral and current head of the world government, Kong. We know very little about this man, and I think most people don't even take him very seriously, but his name might be a crucial clue for us to uncover this character's true power. Just like Vice Admiral Smoker has the smoke fruit, it could be that Kong's abilities are directly tied to his name as well. And if I had to make a guess, I'd say Kong possesses nothing less than the mythical zone of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King of Chinese literature, and the central figure of Journey to the West. That way, Dragon belonging to the Monkey family would have the chance to face the former Fleet Admiral Kong, especially if both of them wield mythical zoans. It would be an enormous hype moment to see Dragon capable of defeating a former Fleet Admiral in a one-on-one battle. But with all of Dragon's ties to Garling since the past in God Valley, it might be that Kong is reserved for Luffy, or perhaps father and son could fight him together. Now that would be beyond hype. There is even, though it may be a remote possibility, the chance that this former Fleet Admiral Kong also belongs to the monkey family. After all, the names seem to connect with each other, don't they? But that, well, doesn't really matter for this video. In any case, given Dragon and Garling's history in God Valley, it is likely that the two will face each other once again. Many speculate that when Garling became a Gorosei, he made a pact with Imu to receive powers of immortality and some kind of demonic ability, similar to those the other Gorosei possess. But as we've seen, this pact with Imu isn't exclusive to the Gorosei. Shamrock, the leader of the Holy Knights, wields the mythical power of Cerberus through his sword. Even though he is not a Gorosei, he too had this power granted to him by Imu. This means that when Garling was still the leader of the Holy Knights in God Valley, he was likely already an immortal individual, wielding the same source of power as the Gorosei, even before officially becoming one of them. So regardless of what his exact ability is, it is very likely that the young dragon, at only 17 years of age, witnessed the terror of that power as it chased him across the entire island of God Valley. And now, Dragon will finally have the chance to defeat that man once and for all. As I said before, for a long time I kept wondering who would be Dragon's main opponent in this final saga. Being the greatest threat to the government, he would certainly need to have a rival equally as powerful. Garling seems to be the best option for that role, not only in terms of power, but also as a matter of closing the cycle in which Dragon could finally bring down the man he once had no chance of defeating in the past. However, even after defeating Garling, it is possible that Dragon might end up facing Imu-sama in a direct confrontation. After all, Dragon and Imu are the supreme leaders of two directly opposing organizations. It makes perfect sense that the greatest leaders of each rival faction would clash. But even if this confrontation happens, I believe it would only be a temporary fight. Once Dragon defeats Garling decisively, perhaps he will not have the strength to continue against Imu. And here lies the possibility of Monkey D. Dragon ending up dying in this final saga. Those who watched my last video about Dragon will remember how his character seems to be strongly inspired by the historical figure of Tupac Amaru II. Tupac Amaru II was a 17th century Peruvian indigenous leader who rose against the oppression of the Spanish Empire, gathering thousands of peasants in one of the largest colonial rebellions in Latin America. His fight aimed to overthrow an unjust system, but despite his initial strength, he was eventually captured and brutally executed, becoming a martyr and a symbol of resistance. So if Ovakada truly based Dragon on this historical figure, this might be pointing toward a similar fate for him at the end of One Piece. Dragon may lead a grand revolution, shake the power of the celestial dragons, and inspire the birth of a new world, but pay that price with his own life, leaving behind his sacrifice as the flame that drives the next generation toward final victory. And the one to carry that revolutionary flame forward would be none other than Sabo. After the death of King Cobra, Sabo became an even more prominent figure worldwide, surpassing even Dragon's image and being named the Flame Emperor, something we could even consider, in a way, as the fifth Emperor of the Seas. The problem, however, is that this revolutionary flame continues to grow, and Sabo's followers even celebrated the death of a kind king like Cobra, showing they are willing to eliminate any monarch they see in their path. So I'm really curious to see how Oda will conclude this extremism that has been building up around the revolutionaries, and especially around Sabo himself. Dragon will certainly face Garling in an absurdly intense battle, but if he ends up dying against Imu, then the hatred toward the government and the celestial dragons could spiral completely out of control, and perhaps it will fall to Sabo to rein in that flame of revolution. Now, given Oda's track record, I think it's very unlikely that Dragon will actually die at the end of the story. But hypothetically speaking, if it did happen, I at least wanted to sketch out one possible narrative path Oda could follow. But the fact remains, and this is the central point of this video, Dragon and Garling, beyond already having clashed in the past, are destined to face each other once more. And this time, it will be the last. If you've stayed until the end of this video, remember once again to leave your like and check your subscription. And don't forget to check out the latest One Piece videos that will appear on screen now for you to watch. Alright? Until next time. Goodbye.